let's start with question number one. So from the short questions, an equal increase in government spending and taxes have no effect on the IS curve. The IS curve represents what?
The goods market.
It's a goods market equilibrium. So in a closed economy, that would comprise consumption by households. You go out and buy the latest smartphone, that's consumption. Investment, firms buy goods. If they buy a new van to make deliveries, that's investment. Government spending, the government buys some weapons for the military, that's government spending. So government spending is obviously included as part of demand. So I'm not going to do the general case of an open economy. You would also, of course, have net exports when considering an open economy. The G, government spending, clearly goes into total demand. So when we raise the G, we will have a direct effect on demand, all else equal. Now taxes, of course, are not directly related to going out and buying goods and services. Tax is a transfer. You have some income or some wealth, the government takes some of that away from you. It's not directly related to spending money on goods. However, taxes, of course, can have an indirect effect. What might taxes indirectly affect?
Consumption.
Possibly consumption. So we had to write down what, in our theory of overall demand, is consumption. Consumption is usually assumed basic Keynesian consumption function. It assumes there's a dependence on disposable income. So autonomous consumption, C0, and then consumption then increases with disposable income, Y minus taxes. What is this C, small c, multiplies disposable income? It's the marginal propensity to consume. So basically, how much does C rise if Y minus T, disposable income, increases by $1? What do we assume about that? This number, is it negative, positive, greater than 1, greater than 2?
Oh, below 1.
It's below 1. It's bigger than 0, but less than 1. That's the key. That's going to turn out to be key to this question. Marginal propensity to consume lies between 0 and 1. Okay, so suppose government spending and taxes rise by equal amounts. G up, taxes up, same amount. Which is consistent with running a balanced budget. If you're running one already, that is. You finance through current taxes any increase in current spending. Is that going to affect demand overall? What do you think? High government spending will raise demand. higher taxes will be what to demand?
Section B.
This originally was the IS curve, which is
Open, close,
goods
and
market.
close.
This was total demand. High government spending is high demand, high taxes. Does what? It gives you lower demand through consumption.
Flexible FX exchange rate. BUT, balance of payment.
Now, higher demand, of course, means that in terms of the IS curve, in terms of the graph that you usually draw to represent this equation, you think of IS curve. As government spending increases, that will shift to the right. Lower demand, of course, IS shifts left. So the question is, overall, do these two effects cancel out, or which one dominates? Which one's going to be larger? Who thinks the government spending effect is larger? That makes sense? Who thinks the tax effect is going to be larger through consumption? There, so you all know this. It seems like you all know this answer. It's a shame that wasn't the case in the prelim scripts I read. So this second effect is smaller than the first because taxes get multiplied by marginal propensity to consume. So overall demand does not fall 1 to 1. With higher taxes, it falls by less than 1. So because G increases, and there that does raise demand 1 to 1, the overall effect is going to be positive. So C between 0 and 1 implies the tax up effect is smaller. So overall, the leftward shift of the IS curve, when taxes go up by the same amount as G, is smaller than the IS shift due to G itself. What I've written here with the associated explanation that I've given you kind of not written down, but what I've been saying, that would probably constitute a 4-mark answer. Maybe 5 marks would go for being more precise about this in the sense of deriving the equation for y and showing how that's taking the derivative with respect to a common change in g and t. But this was not a particularly demanding question. Now, let me say one word about exam technique. I don't want to labour the point about exam technique during the session because anyone can tell you about exam technique. You don't need me to point this out, but obviously no one has said it before, so it kind of feels incumbent on me to say something. There was a tendency when I was reading your scripts. I noticed on many occasions in this question in particular that people made their lives more difficult than it needed to be. So, in an exam, and judging by this course with its relatively high failure rate, it seems that people find the exam difficult. In that situation, you don't make the exam even more difficult than it actually is. This is an easy question that lots of people want to try to make more difficult. For example, by considering the case of proportional taxes. So notice my tax here is a lump sum tax. Now, of course, that's unrealistic. In the real world, taxes are, of course, collected usually as fractions of income, fractions of spending. However, here the emphasis is on what's the effect of taxes on disposable income, less on what are incentives, distortions, effects on the overall marginal propensity to consume of the tax rate. So here you can focus simply on the case of taxes being lump sum. In fact, that's the case throughout this course. Unless you're told otherwise, you can always assume taxes mean lump sum taxes, unless the question says otherwise. That's a good idea to do that because it's a lot easier to work with lump sum taxes. In this particular question, if you've done proportional taxes, it's actually very hard to get the increase in G and T to be of the same size. Working out what tax rate you need to increase overall taxes by the same amount of government spending is tricky because you don't know how much income is going to rise. So you don't know what tax rate exactly to set. It's a very, very difficult question. It's one I would struggle to do the algebra for. I don't think anyone managed to do that convincingly, who did this proportional taxes. So anyone who did that basically threw away a large number of marks for no good reason. I saw mistakes like that over and over again. People making the questions much more difficult than they needed to be. So even if I don't manage to teach you anything about macroeconomics, hopefully I will, but one is always conscious of one's own failings, so maybe I won't. But if I can tell you something useful, it's to improve your exam technique. I'm sure you could all improve your marks simply by improving your exam technique. Any question about that? Whilst we're on the subject of exam technique, as well as not making the questions more difficult, don't waste your time including irrelevant material. So a lot of the time, people are writing 2 pages for a short question, and maybe 1 paragraph of that 2 pages was actually relevant. Here, the material was not. You won't get marks for including irrelevant material. You won't get marks for answering a different question from the one that's written on the exam paper. So don't do it. Maybe you do it because you don't know the answer to the actual question, but at least try the question that you've been given. You won't get any credit at all for a perfect answer to a question that wasn't asked. So really, I do sort out your exam technique as well as trying to improve your understanding of macro.